Marketer of the Day, episode 661. Join the golden age of podcasting, leveraging interviews and repurpose content through conversations with Tom Schwab.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Marketer of the Day podcast. This is Robert Plank, and we're trying something a little bit different today. We're going to mix up our format a little bit. As you know, we started off this podcast with just me, solo cast, and then we moved to mostly interviews, and sometimes I'll jump back in and be the solo cast again. But what we're doing, not every time, but occasionally, is we're going to just cut to the guest of our show and have them riff and do an entire clip on their own, and I'll just kind of jump in as the introduction and the outro. And we're about to introduce Mr. Tom Schwab from Interview Valet. You can check him out at interviewvalet.com/PLANK. And Tom Schwab is a really, I would say, a thoughtful and a socially consistent person. And I would recommend that if you have any interest at all in anything podcasting, content marketing, or just building a list in general, add him on both Facebook and on LinkedIn, because I see him almost every time I log into LinkedIn. He's one of the first things I see. And what he does on LinkedIn is he posts a 1 minute, exactly 60-second video 5 times a week, and he just recommends such and such podcast. He says you're going to want to check out this person's baseball podcast, and I just listened to this episode, and I really got this and this and this out of it, and here's what makes it unique, and here's the reason to go listen right now. Go check it out. And there are some simple strategies that you can apply with that in your space. Think about that. Could you record a 1 minute video, or I guess even audio, but I mean, video would be great because you could post it on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, all that stuff, and help someone out, recommend some person, and think about how that could add up. And the thing about Tom, and I'm not 100% sure about this, but I think he wears the same shirt and jacket, but it changes once a week. So I'm pretty sure that maybe every Monday morning, let's say, he jumps on, he finds these 5 recommendations, he records 5 quick videos just sitting in front of his webcam, sitting at his computer. And I mean, you could even do this on your phone, but he has he spends literally 5 minutes of recording, and maybe you could even say 5 minutes or 10 minutes of research, or have the virtual assistant do it. And Tom is a really smart dude, and he's about to explain to us why we need to be podcasting. And he'll tell you that the last time that he was on the podcast, which is at marketeroftheday.com/403. We talked about podcast interviews, and also, speaking of mixing things up and changing the format, what happened with his interview was I was experimenting with video, and I was using a wireless earphone for the first time, and it didn't record his side of the conversation. So I had to take my notes and record just a solo episode explaining what he said. So you're actually listening to him for the first time in a way. But what he's going to tell you is to make the most out of every podcast interview and to have podcast conversations. Now, ironically, I'm not on the clip with him, but I listened to his clip. I'm telling you about it. You're going to hear from him directly. I'll be jumping back at the ends. But he has an interesting idea for you on how you could post a new blog post every 4 minutes to social media. What if every 4 minutes, somewhere on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, all those places, there was some new piece of content that was posted every 4 minutes. And he's going to tell you that you can do this by having authentic conversations and by repurposing your content. Because when you have these conversations, a lot of interesting things, unexpected things come up, and podcast has been evolving. You're not usually just going for the same old 5 to 10 questions. Things kind of be played fast and loose. And so these loyal podcast listeners who tend to listen to all your episodes, who listen to things sped up, who are highly educated, they've been to college maybe, they're early adopters, they're learners, they're action takers, they're not your usual casual blog readers or your usual Facebook social media scrollers. So I'm hoping that as we bring out Mr. Tom in just a second here, that you're going to get excited to pursue podcasting in some way. I think that everyone should have a podcast, especially if you know how important it is to have some of that free content out there, so that way you can differentiate from other people And if you've ever thought about having a blog, a book, a YouTube channel, things like that, well, a podcast is a great way to experiment with different types of content, to try out different material, to find out what works and what doesn't, and most importantly, to make these connections, because you can't always operate in a vacuum, and you are going to run out of things to tell people. That's why we're in the 600s as far as number of episodes on this podcast, but I keep having people on because people have new things to say, and we have return guests like Tom who have new information. So Tom and his company, Interview Valet, have booked 100 guests on 10,000 podcasts, and he's here to tell you about what is and what isn't working, and he has some new updates, again, about the authentic conversation, about how to repurpose even one single podcast interview into an entire month of content, from audiograms, tweetables, blog posts, transcripts, recap videos, things like that. And then he's also going to tell you about what he and his company look for when they're booking their guests. So that way, if you have a podcast, and we keep saying you should, that you can satisfy some of his requirements, such as have at least 10 episodes, because if you can get your podcast to 10 episodes or more, that means that you're now a survivor. You outlived most episodes. Engagement, which means reviews, comments, and listening. Is there a decent website? Because a lot of people do interviews, not even for traffic. They make the rounds and they'll hop on your show, they'll hop on many other shows, and they'll say, well, if I can visit 25, 50, 100 shows throughout the course of this year, that'll be a lot of clicks. But even if I don't get a lot of clicks, if someone searches my name, my company name, the things I'm looking for, like if you're looking to rank for, say, Atlanta web design agency, what if you went on all these podcast interviews and ranked for those terms? And they also look as far as your episodes and your social media, and are you pushing to your email list? Basically, are you doing things to market your own content and not just cranking out the interviews? And cranking out a lot of interviews is good, but you're a marketer, right? And this is the Marketer of the Day podcast. You need to put yourself out there. So anyway, I'm going to wrap up here and let Tom hop on and do his thing. He's going to tell you about Interview Valet, and he's going to tell you about what they're looking for in a podcast. And then at the end, he'll ask you to check out his fantastic book, Podcast Guest Profits, at interviewvalet.com/plank. So, Tom, glad to be talking to you again.
Robert, I am so excited to be back on Marketer of the Day. It's hard to believe it was 2 years ago we were talking about podcast interviews and how you could leverage targeted podcast interviews to grow your business. And boy, how the world has changed. And I want to give some actionable tips to everyone on what you can do today more than ever to leverage podcast interviews based on where the market has gone and based on what we have learned over this last couple of years. You know, Robert, when we first talked, it was back in 2017, and in some ways it seems like a lifetime ago. Since then, so many things have changed in the market, and now more than ever, podcast interviews can really leverage that. You know, 2 years ago, 2/3 of the people didn't know what a podcast was. There's a company called Edison Research that does a yearly study. And back in 2017, about 60% of the people didn't know what a podcast was, had never even listened to one, as crazy as that sounds. Today, that number is over 51% have listened to a podcast. The studies show that on average, they listen to 7 hours of content. Most of them, 70%, listen to it sped up. And with that, they're higher education level on average and higher income. Now, these people that are listening to podcast interviews are the early adopters. They're the learners. They're the ones that want to take action and be always ahead. So for most people, that's your ideal audience. The market has also changed. You know, I joke that 5 years ago when I went to my first podcasting conference, it was more like Wayne's World. Everybody looked at it as two guys in their mom's basement. Well, in 2018, Harvard University did their first conference on podcasting, and that really showed that it had hit the mainstream. And one of the keynotes at Harvard was talking about this being the golden age of podcasting. And they did corollaries back to the golden age of radio. And I often laugh now when people say, well, is it too late in podcasting? To me, that's like somebody in the 1930s saying, well, is it too late for radio? No, we are still at the golden age where there's so much still ahead of us. And over this, we've learned a lot of things over this last couple of years. Our team has now grown to 18 people, all based in the United States, but not everybody wants to live in Kalamazoo, Michigan with me. But we're serving on average about 100 clients at a time. That means that since we last talked, we have helped facilitate, helped book, help the conversions on over 10,000 podcasts. And that gives us a unique advantage to look at what's working and what's not working. And that's what I want to share with everybody today. Some of the new updates that we're seeing on podcasting and how you can make the most of every podcast interview. First thing we really looked at is that conversations convert. Really, there's a couple different styles of podcasts. 2 years ago, it was very much rote, where maybe there was 5 or 10 questions that every person got asked. And I think of early television, early radio was very much like that also. Easy for the host, easy for the guest, but after a while, you get tired of listening to those same questions. One of the things that we've seen is that interviews always convert better when there's an authentic conversation in there. So it's not just rote questions. And I think that is because people have to know your heart. They have to know how you think, what your visions are, where you're going, why you started this company, why you're excited about this industry before they can start to come alongside with you on that. And sometimes when people just ask you, what book are you reading right now? Or what's your favorite color? It's really hard to know a person just from that. So if you're looking to get on a podcast or start a podcast, definitely focus more to the conversational side. I always say the best podcasts are like two people sitting down at a Denny's, a breakfast place. You're listening to them, and it would be rude to turn around and watch them. It'd be rude to turn around and get in on the conversation, but you're just enthralled by sitting there listening to it. And depending on the podcast, some of those interviews are at 8 a.m. Some of them are at 2 a.m. when the bars close. The next thing that we're seeing is the power of repurposing content. Doing a podcast interview for some people is easy. Me personally, writing a blog, that's homework assignment. But actually talking to someone is much, much easier. And we live in such a great day today where we can produce in the way that's easiest and then use technology and tools to convert that into ways other people can consume it. So let me give you an example. We're working now on taking a podcast interview and making a month's worth of content out of that. This is how we do it. We'll take the interview and we'll make various audiograms for social media, 60-second clips of the podcast interview and some good quote from it. This introduces it to people that are not even listening to podcasts, but are on social media. And it could be Facebook, it could be LinkedIn, it could be Instagram, it could be stories, wherever your audience is. We'll make quotes and memes from that to introduce people to different ideas and drive them back either to the website, to the podcast, wherever they can get more information. And then we'll take the transcript, we'll clean that up, and we'll break it up into 3 or 4 blogs. Think about it. Most people are talking about 150 words a minute. If you figure a blog is about 600 words, well, that means that you're doing a new blog post every 4 minutes. And often those frequently asked questions on a podcast interview can make great blogs. Finally, we've been tuning in our algorithm to pick the best podcasts. And really, we focus on conversions. Our whole focus is getting our clients maximum return on investment of their time and their money, right? With 700,000 podcasts out there, you don't have time to go on each one. So we want to make sure each one provides the maximum input or maximum output. And so our algorithm really looks at 4 things. The first one is the podcast. And we're looking at how many episodes do they have? Still, the cruel fact is that most podcasts that die die within the first 10 episodes. You don't want to be number 7 when it dies at number 8 and they stop paying the Libsyn bill. No one will ever hear you. Well, look at what kind of engagement they have. How many reviews do they have? How many comments do they have? Are people really listening to it and engaging at it? And most people stop right there at the podcast. But there's 3 other steps that you really need to look at. The first one is the website. Every podcast interview is throwing you a backlink. And we've got some clients that are just doing podcast interview for the SEO value. Very, very powerful. Next, we'll look at the reach. Many people are listening to this? How many people are seeing it through either social media or pushing it to their email list? And then finally, we look at experience with previous clients. That's something that only we have access to, but sometimes you can look and see if there's other people like you on this podcast, probably a pretty good indication that it's working for them and working for you. When we talked 2 years ago, I had released a book earlier called Podcast Guest Profits, How to Grow Your Business with a Targeted Interview Strategy. We're actually doing the updated version of that with case studies, some new things that we've learned. There's a workbook that goes along with that. So if you want to do this by yourself, if you want to leverage targeted podcast interviews, it's a strategy that you can use. We give you the cookbook, the formula, so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel on this. And I'm thrilled to provide the book to everyone if they'd like it. We also have a checklist that we use for all of our clients. And if anybody really wants to just talk to me about how they could use podcast interviews to grow their business, I'd love to set up a discovery call with our team to show you how it works and see if we might be able to help you with that. All of that stuff, you can just go back to interviewvalet.com/plank, Plank. You know them, you love them. All of that stuff will be there. So we'll put the checklist, we'll put the book, and we'll put the opportunity for you to get a discovery call with one of our teams. Just go back to interviewvalet.com/plank. And thrilled to be on Marketer of the Day and appreciate everything you do, Robert. Anyone that says doing a podcast interview is easy has never done it or never done it well. It's only the great ones like you that make it look easy.
Awesome. Just making you look good. Thank you very much, Tom, for those insights and for those updates. And what's really great about guys like Tom is he just goes for it. So if you want a tiny bit of behind the scenes inside baseball, I sent a list to all of my past podcast guests. And I said, if you want to either come back for a return visit, a new interview, or shoot me a clip and we'll plug it in and you can promote any website you want. You can tell me what's new with your life and with your business. Feel free. And Tom was one of the very first people to do it. And I imagine, we don't have the ability to ask him this question, but I imagine that he probably has a slot scheduled on his calendar for these exact sorts of things, right? This social interaction, this helping out, this jumping right into it. And we're all busy, but we can all also take the time. We can also take 10 or 20 minutes of time to reach out there and try to get ourselves scheduled on some of these podcasts. That's the best way to promote what you have going on. If you say, here's my affiliate program, here's a link, that's not going to be very well received. But if you say, I see you have a show, I have listened to a few episodes, you have some great guests, you have some great content, I think I can contribute by teaching about this and this and this, now it's reciprocal. Now you can jump on and now you can dispense some free information, and in return, what you get out of it is to be able to promote your link, just like Tom interviewed interviewvalet.com/plank. So go there, check out that page. It has a lot of different links, so that way you can check out Interview Valet itself, Podcast Guest Profits, the updated version. Check out that workbook and that checklist that Tom mentioned. And above all, if you don't have a podcast, consider making it so that way you don't get left behind. And sure, there are some things to figure out, like your equipment and what you'll talk about and who you'll contact and how you can stand out and not just be another mediocre, Me Too kind of podcast. And those are things that you can have fun with and explore over time. But get on a podcast, be consistent, have guests, and pursue these social relationship networking opportunities And you'll be glad you did. So thanks, Tom, for taking the time. Visit interviewvalet.com/plank, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. Have you had a chance to rate and review the show yet? If not, go right now to marketeroftheday.com/iTunes. Click View in iTunes and click the Ratings tab. We would really appreciate a 5-star rating or whatever you think is fair, plus a quick 1-sentence review to tell us how we're doing. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.